which is hard for people to believe, but it's true. It was mostly a matter of 2 or 3 explosions at a time anyway, and usually there was some warning of an attack coming, sirens, parachute flares, and so forth. You had bunkers to go to. Charlie was just pestering us, and that was mostly what was going on. Sure, you get a little shrapnel, and some building gets torn up and so forth, but, like I say, for some odd reason you get pretty used to the mortars and so forth. A lot worse than any of that was the horror you had to deal with every day. More heartbreaking than any normal person could take for long. Things you could never, not in your whole time there, get used to in the way you get used to mortars. In Nha Trang, it was endless, maybe 18-hour days, longer sometimes, hardly ever a break, and this perpetual stream of the most hideous tragedy. It's upsetting for me even now thinking about this. You have to be able to tell your mind to leave it alone, go to something else. I got good at doing that. You have to, or you simply can't survive it. You'd go crazy. By the time I'd been down in Nha Trang for a while, I'd become very bitter, full of anger. All this ghastly horror and death that I couldn't see anything being gained from it. All of it totally pointless. So many of the soldiers were barely more than children, really. For me, it's their eyes. All these years later, I still see them. They'd look up at you like dying puppies, scared and uncomprehending. There were times when all we could do with some of them was kill their pain and let them go so we could get to the ones we were able to keep alive. These, the ones there was no hope for, they'd know they were dying, many of them. All they wanted was to have someone with them. Some of them crying, some just staring at nothing, some talking nonsense. 3 times I had them die holding my hand. One time so tight another nurse had to pry the kid's fingers away when we finally lost him. And let me make one thing clear. This is not like the movies, where some tough made-up John Wayne character gets shot and he's all stoic and in control, talking like a poet until he keels over, still looking good. That, I'm here to tell you, is pure disgusting. It's not like that. What it's like is, you've got people brought in shrieking, terrified, writhing in the most god-awful pain, or so doped up with morphine that they might as well be gone already. I hate those movies, all that phony John Wayne stuff. I hate that stuff more than you could possibly know. No movie shows what really happens, unspeakable things. Guys like their legs gone. I had one with barely anything left below the navel, and he was still alive, still talking, for maybe a minute anyway, acting like he'd be okay. Landmine. One with his eyeballs hanging out of his skull like some gruesome monster. I've seen them with no face left, only a mass of bloody slop in place of one, and still not dead. I've seen them with every limb gone, nothing but a trunk. That's the reality. That's the reason I hate the lame-brained Hollywood John Wayne crap so much it makes me shake. Him and all like him. They're outright liars. I'm going to stop right there because this guy goes on and on about it, but I want to say if that sounds a little gruesome, it's his fault. He wanted me to read that to you. I'm going to also follow up, because I think it's important to do so at this point, with Robert McGowan's piece of nonfiction here. He sent me this after I had accepted what I just read. He sent me, Robert McGowan, got cancer. And he sent me an article that had been written about him. And I said to him, I'd like to put this in the book. And he said, fine, you rewrite it the way you want, and I'll sign it. So I think it's important that this be read. This is called A Veteran's Interview Concerning Agent Orange and Cancer by Henry Tyne and Robert McGowan. Tell us about the cancer you've contracted. That's my part. I was diagnosed in January of this year, 2012, with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, B-cell stage 11. I have a wad of college degrees, but not much interest in medical matters, so I haven't really learned much about it. It's my understanding that non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is a cancer generally susceptible to treatment, but mine is being stubborn. Does does the Veterans Administration have compensation policy for this? The VA does have a compensation policy in place now for these kinds of problems. If a Vietnam veteran contacts a kind of cancer they have determined is connected to Agent Orange exposure, then they behave toward the vet as though he or she deserves something from them. So they, quote, compensate, unquote, the victim with a monthly payment during treatment and for 6 months afterward if the veteran survives. So I'm getting some money each month, which does help financially, though on the whole I'd rather not be seeing them at all with this problem. Aside from the fact that the lymphoma might kill me, it has made my life miserable. The side effects of treatment include weakness, lack of energy, and difficulty concentrating, to name a few, not to mention the frequent and long hospital stays. What is the relationship between Agent Orange and cancer? Agent Orange-connected cancers are increasingly common among Vietnam vets, far more common than among the general population, so there's really little doubt about that. In my case, given there's virtually no history of cancer in my family going back several generations, and given that I've never been exposed to any other cancer-causing material, and given that Agent Orange was in fact used there widely when I was in Vietnam, it's pretty near certain my cancer is Agent Orange connected, a delayed gift from Uncle Sam, the American military, and Dow Chemical Company, among various other manufacturers of this hideous poison. What about Agent Orange and the Vietnamese people? The horrors of Agent Orange are far worse in Vietnam than among American veterans of that war. Several million Vietnamese have suffered grisly illness and death because of the Agent Orange sprayed over a high percentage of their country, and over 500,000 babies there that have been born either dead or with grotesque birth defects. And these effects are not going away. The United States has done practically nothing to aid the Vietnamese in this tragedy. We haven't even legally acknowledged that we're the source of this mess. What is the treatment and how are you progressing? The usual treatment is chemotherapy and radiation. I was to receive 6 chemotherapy treatments to be followed by several sessions of radiation. This, I anticipated, would cure me. However, a CT scan taken after my 5th chemo treatment indicated that my tumor had not responded. It had in fact grown through these few months. So we skipped the radiation, and I've gone through three-day inpatient chemo treatments with a far more aggressive chemo regimen than the previous one. So far, that hasn't worked either. Next is stem cell transplant. My odds have gone from 90% positive to 30% positive, and it's not looking good. How does stem cell transplant work? I don't know much about it, except there are these various kinds of stem cell transplants. I'm getting the kind that requires a donor. How do you feel about the prospect of dying? I would say I have little emotion about dying. I'd rather not do it, of course, but I'm not afraid of it. My greatest source of pain is the grief this will cause my beloved wife, Peg, and the rest of my family and friends. Also, I have a lot of writing not yet published. This I do care about very deeply. I am my work. I want my work to live, and I want to live to work. Is it possible to have complete proof that your cancer is due to Agent Orange? No, it's hard to prove it legally or otherwise. Consequently, the chemical companies that manufactured Agent Orange have kept largely out of trouble for many years now, despite what is considered clear evidence that Agent Orange has had a horrendous effect on many Vietnam veterans and innocent Vietnamese civilians. Not one of the manufacturers or users of this substance has been proven liable. And lastly, how do you feel about the people who manufactured and defend Agent Orange? Well, in this case, it took 2 to tango. Dow Chemical and others manufactured the drug, but the United States government used it. I might be dying because of the collaboration of those two. How do you think I feel about them? And Robert McGowan died 2 weeks ago. Okay, so we're going to now turn to Mr. Daughtry's work. This is Buchenwald Diary. This Buchenwald Diary with Richard Daughtry. In April 1945, when General George Patton and the United States Army were racing across Europe in pursuit of German infantry, I was a technical sergeant in the 377 Fighter Squadron, a part of Patton's left flank support. The support missions had been slowing down of late, and we were finding ourselves with progressively more leisure time. One day a group of us was gathered by the side of the road next to the airfield, shooting the bull and watching the traffic pass by. Suddenly a Jeep screeched to a halt in front of us, and the driver blurted out, "They are burning people up back there." We asked him several questions, and he mentioned a prison camp near the town of Weimar, then drove off excitedly. For you all in the back, if you want some seats, you can ask the guy in the front there to bring a couple back, because there's others back there in the hallway, if you wish. That's what he's up there for, to take care of this.
This is my purpose.
We thought this was peculiar and wanted to find out more, so the five of us went to the executive officer and asked him if we could check out the story. Frankly, we had nothing better to do. He seemed interested himself and said he would authorize a 2.5-ton truck to make the trip if we could find 10 more soldiers interested in the mission. It didn't take us long to round up the necessary people, and so all the arrangements were made. So then I've got a section in here about them driving to Weimar. And we arrive at the main gate of Buchenwald.
That point in there between is important to me, going through Weimar.
The American soldiers?
No, my driving through there, my feelings. If I could
I'll do it. Oh, go ahead. You want to talk?
Yeah, just to let me
Go
know
for it.
my feelings. We've been in the Air Force. We didn't have a lot of stuff on the ball like some of the other outfits did. Anyhow, we thought that Patton had taken the city of Weimar. We actually were under that impression when we left. We wouldn't have gone. So when we got into the city, we encountered just one occasion. We saw two soldiers lying next to the curbing on the street side. Curb about yay high. They were hiding pretty well. They were being sniped at from a house up in there. So we really knew that we were in trouble, and that Patton's Third Army hadn't reached Weimar yet. So there we were, sitting ducks, so to speak, going through the city of Weimar, 100 to 150 people, population, and we didn't know where some guy with half nuts would open firearms with a bazooka or what. But that's the feeling we all had, and even when we encountered the two young men lying in there beside the curb, and I was sitting on the very back on the right, and I looked in his face and he looked in mine. It happened so quickly. I don't think he knew what to do, and I don't think the people shooting at him from that house knew what to do, and we didn't know what to do. So we just kept going for about 2 blocks and stopped and talked this over, and we didn't know how to combat something. We'd been in the Air Force. We had never had to train like that. So we were hoping that maybe just passing there would have had some influence on the people that were shooting at him. So we went on and went on to the city, through the city, and we reached the middle of the city where this railroad station is, and there's been a highway 5 miles built by the people prisons there, concrete highway, a small incline, all the way to the camp. So, when we got to the camp, there were 2 people at the gate, so we had only encountered 4 people altogether in that huge city of Weimar. So it was a scary thing for me thinking about what really could have happened. But by the way, they call that 5-mile stretch the Way of the Cross. Now that was the Jews there in that camp designated that as that term. Because the reason they did was because right there when they would take these prisoners out of those off the trains they came in, some of them had been in there for 2 or 3 days, and those cattle cars, they just stuffed them full of those Jews. And I say it like that because that's the way it was. So they some of them rode out, they already dead, so the ones that could walk, they started them off there, and most of the time they were told to run. So how in the world could people run after being in such a situation for 2 or 3 days? And so the ones that didn't run, they'd shoot behind the head. So that's why it was called the Way of the Cross, that 5-mile stretch from Weimar to the camp. And some wonder about the people of that city, how they felt. This was the cultural center of the world, actually. Weimar was. And so here comes Mr. Hitler, and he builds this camp out here 5 miles, the opposite, really the opposite from being culture type of situation. So you wonder what made him do that. And so I just, again, excuse